Scott and I had known each other now almost 25 years. We done upfit together. We had held each other to babies. We lived in the same neighborhood. We celebrate each other's successes. And we've been on what I would call each other's personal coordinators for as probably about as long as we've known each other. And for the last 2 years, as we've been in this transition, we had lunch together once a month, pretty much without fail. And that has been really beautiful for me to see my friend do something that is so meaningful and special. And he's really more fulfilled and happier than I've ever seen before. So I asked Scott at a lunch a couple weeks ago, like, what would success for this night look like? And he said, first, I just wanted to be, 10% as good a conversation as we normally have at our lunches and find a way to get all the other folks involved and engage and co-create what tonight's going to be. And second thing he wanted to do was have fun. So with that, how about we get started and have fun? Scott, join me, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to talk just a question, and then people most likely to have conversation the rest of the way. But one of the names that you will just got to go into is chock full of case studies of people who have gone through career transitions from Abby Wambach to Gandhi, Whoopi Goldberg, Martha Stewart. And Scott likes to use these case studies as a way to really inspire. But I think he doesn't really appreciate that his own story of career transition is one that is equally inspirational and one that I want you to take a lot away from. It also feels something like the world and the people and the world. So stop by a vote Brene Brown fan. With that, I'll have a little nod to her and I just keep on stop. Why don't you follow us line?
All right. So I was born and now I'm not on my job. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you to everybody as well. Thanks, everybody for being here. Of course, in on the Zoom. Thank you for joining. We told a lot of it, and I think as I think through the transition, which is going to be a theme for tonight, I will say I am very methodical. I don't know if I was always that way. I don't know that I always saw the risks that, in retrospect, I probably took mass risks at a time and sort of the benefit you. As I got older, I think that became more serious. You have a family, you have responsibilities, but it's a little more considered. So the story I tell in the book about my transition out of Warner Brothers Discovery is one that I thought might be worth sharing. It was definitely cathartic for me as a selfish sort of author prerogative. But as I re-diagnosed how I went through it, I did my best to distill it in the steps that I think everyone can take. And while the premise of the book is midlife, the steps of career transition, I think, are worthwhile and relevant at any age. The other part of the story that I think is really important to get across is why I chose this path. And to me, it was a coincidence of the pandemic introspection, the challenge cable business, and then my own personal life, getting ready to turn 50 and our children getting ready to leave the house. So all that was sort of happening at the same time to the point where I became open-minded to the possibilities. So I think that was a very first step. It's the stage I hope a lot is being open-minded and then beginning to explore what that next chapter might be. And in that exploration, it can be internal and external. What is I want to do? What are my strengths? What are my interests? But also what's out there? What are the possibilities? So I had sort of done that on my own and then ran into a voluntary session with an executive coach. And I had a staff who executive coaches before, and they'd all come back with very positive experiences, but I hadn't gone myself. So in that first session, with this sort of journal or list of options on the table, I was in the session and they helped me see something more clearly than I had been able to see it on my own. And that was the first part. I was like, oh, this is something. There's real value here. And the second aha was, I think I can do that. And so there's still something magical about that, of be open-minded, that leave room for something to then penetrate. But then based on my methodical self, I started training to become a coach. I worked towards certification, all of this prior to layoff. And I'm really appreciative of that. It's basically 9 months of exploration prior to the layoff, because now I see clients going through that aren't prepared, aren't ready, and it's a shock, and it's humbling, to say the least, and there's lots of reactions to that. So if there's anything I can say tonight for people considering career transition, is to at least think through the possibilities of what you might do if you did that thing. And if not, it's okay too. There are coaches, there are books, there are plenty of resources to help yourself through transition. But when I think about my story, it's really more of recency, because what I want to do is help people help themselves through career transition.
Excellent. So you talked about being methodical. The subtitle of your book is verbatim, A Guide to Navigating Four Stages of Career Transition. So I imagined you identified the four stages as part of the methodology that you went through when you were going through your experience. You want to talk about those four stages and how you navigate it and how you apply it.
Absolutely. So I'll stand real fast, but I'll go through a little bit more. So realize, explore, articulate, then act. It's not an awesome acronym. Don't try. That's what you'll but the realize is like that light bulb, right? It's time. I'm getting, I'm stuck, I'm lost. Some of those emotional sort of straits pulling in. And that's extremely very personal in terms of how you're feeling, what you're feeling. For me, I still would have never left if the layoff hadn't happened. I wanted to stay there. I was committed. I loved my team. I was putting my energy to growth, which certainly side of things come. Explore, as I mentioned, internal exploration. There's assessments you can go through. You can name the laundry list. External exploration, what's out there, where growth. There's exercises for each of these stages, all in the book, because I want people to be able to do this on their own. Particularly, and I think this is where people get a little twisted. I have people almost every day who are in job search mode, or have just been laid off, and they will be looking at a resume. It's almost like this stress-induced knee-jerk reaction. Look at my resume, look at my resume. And to me, learning for great marketers around Dave Turner and my classmates, if you don't know what your audience is, if you don't know who you're speaking to, you can't do proper articulation, you can't do great marketing. And so the exploration phase is designed to create hypotheses. I don't believe in full certainty. I know Perry said I have a level of conviction. I did, and I do, and it happens. That's I think some of the magic of it. But when I work with students or even older clients, I think that certainty or conviction of exactly what you want to do is pretty clear. And I'm not even sure it's that helpful to be telling people, you need to know what you're going to do the rest of your life, because the story I tell is when I was in undergrad, in 93 to 96, I could have never said I wanted to run NBA.com, because the internet didn't exist. And so I think that's still true today, which is, any of us, never too young to start something new, certainly for students or anywhere in between. I think the most important thing is to be learning, growing, and build those adaptation resilience skills. Because if you become an expert in something today, it's more likely than not to be irrelevant at some point. And so the exploration leads into the articulation, where you have a hypothesis, you build your story for that hypothesis. That is where some of the work can then begin on resume, interview from other LinkedIn presence. Then the last stage is activation. So that's your go-to-market strategy. Again, thinking like a marketer, I've now got my story, I've got my targets, I'm going after it. And by going after it, hopefully you get some data back. And so that begins a cycle that it may be back into articulation phase, it could be fed back into exploration and something's not working out. And so, I teach a class at Bitcoin's Motto for the graduate business school students, and I tell them, hold on to these days. When you find yourself unsure what you want to do in a few years, you can fall back on it. And whether it's the Ikigai exercise or the figure out exercise, you'll find yourself going back to some of those notes, asking yourself, what are these still relevant? Is there something I could take from this? And how do I then apply that to my new plan? And I think that range of motion is certainly possible. I think everybody's capable of it, but maybe this process helps distill it to something that feels realistic.
So you just mentioned Deep Dive as one of the tools for models that use. Everyone here may not know what that is, but I know it is possibly of everything in the book, one of the models that I know that you're most passionate about. We want to talk about that a little bit. What is it, and why do you feel it's such a powerful tool to work with?
So I have to say that this is not proprietary. I think this is something that's been out there. It's Japanese philosophy. What my coworkers used to do. A lot of the exercises are more custom, like built custom pieces around Ikigai. But the door that opened for me to sort of be infatuated with this concept is learning a little bit about the Japanese philosophy, and it's really comes from there's a documentary on Netflix called The Blue Zones. If you've heard of the Blue Zones, there's 5 or 6 areas around the world where there's a overabundance of supercentenarians, people over a liquid. And so there's been a lot of research and studies on people that have been living long periods of applying to happening. Certainly diet and exercise have something to do with it. Socialization does. But this word Ikigai translates closest to a reason for being. You might say purpose. And so whether that's, in your younger years or your older years, having a reason you get out of bed in the morning, something you're excited about. In the worksheet that's out here tonight, or you can grab one afterwards, or I think it's going to get sent out with this, or it's in the book. The diagram is the Venn diagram of the intersection of strengths, interests, demand, like what you get picked for, and what the world needs or society. And I don't mean it to be this calculation for exactly what you should be doing. What I've found is by people doing this exercise, journaling or workshopping me, it makes for good discussion. And I think this is some of the magic of coaching is the discussions and the questions I can have based on what I'm seeing in people's exercise, they might not have seen for themselves yet. It's like your brain doesn't it's like a weird Excel circular referencing there. It doesn't let you ask yourself certain questions. And so finding those right words or the right question and asking the right way at the right time, and sometimes be inspirational and bring that aha moment or a light bulb that leads you put the heck up. So that's really a foundational exercise for people that aren't sure what they want to do next. So people have that certainty. And so the 2 big questions in coaching are, what do you want? And have you yet? And my job is to distill those down to questions that are a little easier to answer or sort of piecemeal your way through them to the point where you then trust yourself to make progress along with exercise.
It's fun for me, as it is usually in our lunch conversations, just watch how excited you get when you're talking about working with clients. When you think about it, what is the most fun ahas that you see clients have? And maybe that also helps bring the concept of life, or he's one that explain it. Someone has that or
Yeah. Well, going back to my corporate life, you're doing people, look at people resumes. One of the things I always did was look back at their first job. So I think it tells you a little something interesting about them, because that's we're in formation stage at that point. So when you talk about interests, a lot of people when they fill out their exercise actually start to talk about professional interests, but it's really meant to be where do you get joy from? And if you work in corporate long enough, people said that I was institutionalized. And I had to sort of like shake off some of that stuff as I became an entrepreneur. But I think there's some truth to that. I should just sort of get this momentum, inertia towards saneness and identity of what you think of yourself as, what other people think of you as. And that doesn't really let you see some of the core joy that you might have on another path. If people are gonna just do the same job at another company, they'll figure out how to do that. I can help them in some ways. But if they're really not sure, they're stuck or their brain's sort of got this blocker, having conversations about some of the things that you do as a hobby, the things that you do when you're procrastinating, the things that you did when you were maybe younger, coming out of college, maybe, would be considered idealistic. For me, because I've had this career in sports, media, and technology that I enjoyed so much, I just want people to give that option a chance. And it doesn't mean you go there. Some people, there's obviously paying the bills, like a reality of people's lives, professions. But that's just the side of the bed I wake up on is idealistic and optimistic. And so I think that's what I'm supposed to be doing, is letting people think about that possibility of creating what one of my clients called last week, eternity, and that intersection that might be possible between your vocation and your recognition of your hobby.
Is there what client that stand out that they really taken that to the next level and actually received that professionally?
Yeah, I remember working when, somebody that was a friend and a colleague previously, and he went nuts on the Dickey Guide. Like he had posted notes of every color, a diagram. I remember sitting in a conference room actually over at Emory where we were looking at it all. It's almost like Beautiful Mind with John Nash. He's like, somehow through all of that, he found some consistency. He found the trend. It wasn't me finding it. And that's not the job. It's creating a mechanism, an environment where that light bulb comes through. And once he had that clarity is oftentimes the goal, not just getting a job. Once he had that clarity, all of his energy could go in that direction. And so that's where the exploration led to articulation. And then every conversation he was having with somebody else about maybe wanting to do something else, it was more directed, and that led to something that shows you good questions like.
We talked over the course of the last 2 years as you've been on this journey yourself about risk and different kinds of risks, levels of risk tolerance. What do you think for people who are going through this process who either have had career transition may discussed upon them, or they're maybe just, casually considering a move? What do they perceive to be the biggest risks, and what do you think actually are the biggest risks? Because those two might not be the same.
It's hard to generalize on this one. All walks of life, all socioeconomic situations. I think that's where the personal conversation happens. And the more I learn about, what their goals are, what their motivations are, ask them to define risk. If they flag fear as a reason that they have been able to move forward, ask them, what does fear you put out? If I were to find something in the data that would, had it be some trend, taking care of your family is the one. It's super personal. It's very emotional. Some of those conversations I sort of run up against that line with therapists, and I hear that a lot, and not a professional in that way. I refer people if necessary. But it's emotional and vulnerable when you're talking about taking care of your family. And I think that's perceived. I have to respect that it's real, but I'll tell you one mechanism that I would suggest that I even did for myself is the bottom line on that is healthcare. And so if you haven't had to look out for your own healthcare before. If you've been in a book like 20 years and you're just doing any dual enrollment thing, yes, it costs money, it's complicated, there's a lot of stuff in that. But if you fear that day where you go on Cobra or Cobra runs out, I would just do a little bit of research on what it actually costs. There's more options today. The marketplace is out there, there's brokers out there. It doesn't mean it doesn't cost, and the cost is still real. But once you make that as a number, it becomes less scary. Fear comes from unknown. So if I can help them make one of their drinking a little more known, then they have a chance to maybe do something about that, which again clears some of the mind share away from that open-mindedness.
What are some of the commonalities that you're seeing, whether it's just, out in the world or specifically with your clients in terms of where the passions are, what other things are that they maybe regret not having done sooner? And how do you look back?
That regrets is upward. The two words I hear the most are stuck and sore. And they can mean different things to different people. But that's what I hear the most. What I think that's based on is a little bit of just sort of how industry and economy works now. I've been doing more research on sort of the younger generations and how they define career and what that looks like. And, I'm going to sound old, whatever old it is, I'm 50. But I feel like, I feel like the career path was more defined. You go to school, you get a degree, you get a job. And I don't think it was guaranteed then, but now to that younger generation, it feels very scary because industries are changing. Companies are buying out of business. There's a lot of rapid activity. And so it almost has to be a self-guided endeavor. And I don't think everybody's trained for that, through school or otherwise. And I don't think everybody's had role models, right? Their parents, including us, that can relate to that sort of imagery. And so as I'll say midlifers enter this phase or situation, we're not as accustomed to it. And as the younger generation just begins their process, it's why it's all about that learning and adaptability and resiliency so much. Is the goal line is going to move, the world's going to change, and if you become expert on programming language, it's not the best chance for long-term career stability. And I think we just have to change the definition of what that stability looks like. Maybe I'm disillusioned. I end up in career transition every day. But I think there's some reality to the pace of change, especially technologically, where a career journey is going to be more curvy and more challenging. And so I want to be in help that next generation be better prepared.
I love that. When you think about your journey, right, going back to your other position as a case study, what's been the most surprising part, like the mission for you? And that could be just about actually be in transition itself. That can be about becoming an entrepreneur. What's been surprising for you over the
It's easy. It's how much I love it. I can't believe I failed like every day. And that's again the fact. I know I'm emotional about stuff, but it's like, really? Every day.
So, as I said before, I've never seen you as happy as fulfilled. Where you can see how much that has right now. Once you had the hardest part, right? You loved a lot about it. It's been amazing, but if you were to reflect that, the things that have been taught. So,
Yeah, I miss like coworkers a ton. The client coach relationship is not meant to be hierarchical, but it has a little bit of a feel like managing a staff or a team. Teaching feels like managing a team a little bit. But having coworkers to bounce stuff around with, lean off for their expertise, create chemistry for a better solution. Maybe that was an extra special at Kerner, but man, we did great stuff. And so I've had to recreate that. I don't really see that coming. And so it's about a year in, and now next week it's 2 years from my business launch. So it'll be 2 years next week. And the first year, I had a lot of reflection on that. What is I'm missing? How do I account for that? So I'm part of a couple of career services companies that I have some other coaches that I could collaborate with, share resources with. Feel like that's community. One of them went to the Holiday Garden in Dallas. So recreating that, getting out in the basement, doing a lunch or coffees, whether it's clients or friends or partners. So I've had to be way more natural about that part of it. We work to get to that way. Carrie was being, as much as she said we would often work together, she's one of like 3 people I show my annual business. And that replaces some of that for me. It's huge. Not just because of the camaraderie, but the value. I got to the end of my first year as building the business plan because I've run businesses my whole career. I made this habit of gathering my data, doing searches, looking at what I should do, going forward, and going like. And it was the craziest feeling to finish that and not have to show it to somebody. Talk about like the habituation or institutionalization. And so I then had the choice of what I would do with it. And so between my coach, Carrie, my baby, they got to ask me the tough questions. And because of who they are, they do. And I welcome it because it's going to make them better. And doing that by choice reminded me how valuable this should be.
it's been amazing to watch you in this process. I hope this comes across the right way. I'm just so proud of you, and I know a lot of what's here at Bar as well. You were talking about earlier, like the ambiguity and how we can help the younger generation, start to prepare for a career that's going to have more ambiguity in it. How would you say your time at Emory helped prepare you for the career that you had for 20 years? The traditional career that you had for 20 years coming out of school, and how did it help prepare you for the career that you're running now?
Thank you. Certainly about that to answer my questions. One thing that is truly unbelievable is some of the frameworks that are in the book that I use with my clients today. I drafted and Goisweta in the auditor grade in 2002. We had a class called Goisweta Plus. It was taught by Molly Epstein. And it was our chance to learn, what it does mean to go after a career search or job search. And I don't remember all the things we did in here, but I documented a couple of things. One was called, it's now called Figure It Out, Publishing Industry Geography, FIG, are the 3 main variables in the job search trend. And I didn't have the acronym down back then. It actually just sort of looked like a spider. So I called it the spider strategy. And I was using that with Mentee for 20 years until I became a career coach. So one, very tactfully, I was using materials that I developed during that time with my own job search. Aside from that, what I think I'm using today, I've learned from reading as well, is still really leadership. That was what I saw in Boswell when I did decide to go there. And it's something I identified with, and I'm not sure every business school at the time or even now identifies that as a key skill. Like maybe marketing and finance are. I went into Boswell wanting to be a CPO, which turns out wasn't an entry level job. And so I had to sort of find path. But I think that was encouraged and supported, and then being around you all sort of salt on the noodles for it. And so now when I look at how I run my business and how I help my clients, leadership is it's certainly not about telling people what to do because that's not how I've ever done it. It's definitely not how I'm doing it now. But it is about trying to do things. It is about trying to do things in a different way. And it is about trying to make impact of lead by example. And so I think my confidence in that skill as a skill and something that I could embrace and something that I felt like over indexed in, I still carry forward today, hopefully in every.
It's funny you mentioned the spider chart. I actually have a hard copy print out of the spider chart that you did back in somewhere in between 2001 and 2003 that you shared with me. I thought it was such a great tool. So I love that it makes way in the book because it's something you can put friends even going about 20 years. If you had to boil everything down into one piece of advice that you would give to people who are either in the midst of a midlife career crisis or just navigating career time,
Ask for Bella. It's impossible to do anything about it. I had the good fortune of not being the most skilled in just about anything in my life. I've always claimed to be Jack of all trades, master of none. And, many of my friends and colleagues prove that to you, And so for me, that's such a useful dose of humility. And if you combine humility with vulnerability, there's an exercise called personal board of advisors, personal board of directors, and it identifies 4 different types of advisors. I tried to do this in a way that helps people maybe think of people that might be on your lips. And one is your number one thing. That's your cheerleader. That's generally what I am for most of my teams and some of my clients. There's the straight shooter, the person that's going to tell you some things that you might not want to hear, but you need. They have to be able to break through. And I've been for like that. It'll be 3 years before let up. It's got to be at some point just a number on a piece of paper. Has nothing to do with your performance. And that got me mentally thinking a little bit. The lifelong friend, they're the ones that know your values. And so somebody that you're saying, I'm thinking about accepting this job or going in this direction or working with this company, they can check. And they can do it on this. Which one did I do this? It's the industry experts. Sorry about that. So the industry expert, if you've ever tried to explain your challenge of working to somebody that doesn't work in your industry, and you're like, so you don't get it. Or maybe your parents, or maybe your kids are explaining it to get it. Having somebody that understands the industry nuances, I think is important. It might be a functional nuance, it might be an industry nuance, but having somebody like that, I think brings something that doesn't have to be for be spending it your life. But on that list that you're making of people that might be able to help you, people that you trust, people that won't judge you, that might fill, 3 or 4 in those categories, my advice is ask for help. It's okay. You can all keep it.
I think we've got about 5 minutes left before you and I. Is that right?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah,
Um,
we'll adjust.
You mentioned vulnerability, always bringing back to Brene Brown's podcast that Scott and I listen to regularly are Brene Brown and with Rapid Fire. So I thought I would throw in a couple other questions, which given the fact that you listen to all of their podcasts, you should have your answer. Stop the line anyway. What is something that people often get all about?
Should know things. That I'm nice all the time. Nobody's nice all the time. I do my best. Still meditating while it did a gratitude meditation was holy. Then nobody walks up with her.
What is a hard lesson that the universe keeps putting in front of you that you not be willing to overcome?
exercise is a lifelong challenge. I grew up an athlete. He's an athlete, I guess. But when you don't have a coach for that and have to train yourself, that was like my first weight up. You know, I'm 35 to 37, probably wasn't the healthiest. But developing habits, finding new habits, finding variety, I get that.
So what are you doing today on the exercise front? Let me say it.
I wouldn't call it fun and exciting, but we promised to be real. I was on the treadmill this morning at a 10% incline, having an instructor yell at me to go faster. And I'm not sure if her walking fast and running coincide, but I'm trying to ease up on my knees at this age. So walking fast and maybe incline is sort of what to do.
You've got all guy to have a mind over here. Look at you down. Look at you. Shame. What is it? Well, that has really changed what like the thought about life.
Yeah, we talked about this. The Surrender Experiment was the first book I read independently. Several people's recommendations. It's my OC book, and the concept is just sort of like let go. A lot more to it, but not having to win every argument. I'm going to be right about everything, but first to do its time. That letting go to me is pretty powerful.
Last two questions. What is something you are super excited for?
So easy.
Okay, that fear.
No, I'm excited to think like Mars. What I was gonna say, that's like sure, Scott. Like no, I'm really excited to do like science tomorrow and see what I can do to help. But beyond that, I'll say 2026 1 o'clock.
Okay, last one is something that you are really grateful for right now.
So in my gratitude meditation, I said number 1 friends. Number 2 is nature. Every day, I really benefit from it outside.
Well, hopefully this met the criteria that's set up to mutually for success that you'll have a fun conversation. I know we want to say some time for Q&A, equal a chance to tap into your expertise. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone here for showing up the way you always do, which is just with a ton of vulnerability, being authentically you. You may not be nice all the time, but you always show up at heart. And I know that that's meeting with your clients can start bringing that over earlier, guys. Pulse on all.
Bring it on.
You want to have any questions? They want to ask Scott? All right. Chat my.
Get your steps in.
Very well. Hey, Scott. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation today that you had a little bit of flexibility and open-mindedness about yours. So you're some, or maybe it's earlier stage more than after in the super laws. But as you reach, whereas we are going to a certain level of transitioning points, like there is what we think everyone do, but then how to balance that to random opportunities that may be sent to yourself that are not necessarily planned, but how you incorporate those into later other plans as you think about, well, I wasn't thinking about that, but is that, I mean, that can open up that flexibility, similar to what we're all doing at, free, right? Some of us that wanted CEO and was something about our consultants, but then some of those stumbled and sure, or it's an industry. And we established a career there. And so similar to that point, how do you balance once you are at this stage where you're that opportunity that may have approached itself that wasn't planned, or even your thoughts?
Giving them a chance to think.
That sounds good. Oh, yeah, there's House, one of our classmates. To me, it sort of what disciples that open-mindedness, 'cause for the most part, I love my job. I really got it pretty good. You know, the type of work I was able to do, the people I was working with, the types of events I was going to, it really was what I wanted it to be, way more. I had some times during that 20 years that I was thinking about other things or something might have presented itself. During those times, I was sort of just playing the work with what people would now call a side hustle. And that's becoming more common where it's like, okay, where can I get that fulfillment? Where can I immerse, experience that passion, even if it's not in my insurance or industry, as you said. Because it might not be. And you might be doing what's important to you and what's important to your family at that risk and that fear are super real. And so finding something you can do alongside, to me, that starts planting some seeds subconsciously. That work I did, cultural transformation of some of my teams I did, the professional development funding I did on my team. Like some of those pieces, I didn't do those. They might become this. But when I did become truly open-minded about what I might do, I could finally start mapping it back. And all of a sudden, it made all the sense in the world. So I think that clarity follows the open-mindedness. But along the way, there's some seeds you can plant, which is sort of like tribing. What is I can spend this weekend doing, or what can I learn to put somebody in another place? And maybe some of those pieces do add up over time. So when it is time, that clarity has a chance of appearing, and you don't feel like you're starting to stop.
The mic. We have folks on the line as well. So they want to hear your thoughts.
And sure. So speaking of vulnerability, there is a fine line or perhaps even a cliff. Vulnerability and loss of confidence. And it goes with that period of time and surrounded by stripes of support that you got. And lost confidence begins, it also snowballs. When you talk of your binds, where you start, they use both these spikes. Where you start with how you open that lock up, that's just say vulnerability is real, it's not basics. My third order, I never really thought that was being different. So I'm contemplating that. The second question gets you to answer. Working with my clients, I do really see a lot of people as a professional though. And I think that's a privilege. I do allow me with that conversation where I think their willingness to show up, what I talked about further at Super Help, their willingness to show up is not like they've done what they needed to do. It's now my job to help them. One example of this, I remember really distinctly, is I asked a client to go to Italy, did him, and read his own recommendations. What have people said about you? And it's like he forgot. That's how painful this transition can be for people. They're stuck, they're lost, they're not sure what they're gonna do, they're grinding, they're not getting into it, or whatever that might look like for people. And so that's what they do, but I'll tell you one of my secrets as well. Certainly as an entrepreneur, it happens. And I think the vulnerability is a little more in sharing. It's almost like sharing your lack of confidence is vulnerability. Or I don't know if that matches up per day. But when I left the company, see that when I was asked to leave the company, because I practiced that, my staff gave me a jar of notes. This year probably orchestrated the whole thing, and it's people saying nice things about. I keep it on my desk. Because if I'm not feeling great, it's very, very visible. We all need it.
Good to know. Yeah, that's
And practice now. So I got through exercises like this many times, and I'm always very good. It sounds like a big difference. Just for people going through something that I had to put myself up, said it's allowed that you put your disability back and diagram to perfection. You wanted to have the skills. You fill that chart out to perfection. The opportunity just isn't there. It's not. When do you tell people that it's just standard time, that they have to keep on pushing forward, that, they not give up, but something needs to change? To counterpart, there's a saying out there, well, system fails and create your own system, right? So, they fought up and be determination, keep persevering. How you doing, man? Sure. Why'd you matter?
What was your name again? Peter. Peter. Okay, thanks, Peter. So first on the Ikigai diagram, one of the circles is demand. And demand does have to do with the marketability of your sort of intersection of skills and interest. The way we talk about demand when I'm talking about with clients is, it was like that, like recipe quotes, where the pockets get linked. So, to be clear about my coaching style and ICF sort of code of ethics, I don't tell people what to do. I don't tell people how to do it. It's a joint exercise where I ask a question, where is the growth opportunity that aligns with your intersection of skills and interests? And how might you determine the growth potential of the space that you're trying to get into? How many job postings are there in that area? What are the livelihoods? My intention by training is for that light bulb to go on for the person themselves and then see it in their own way. I think it's just so much more powerful when experienced from within. There's a book called The Advice Trap by Michael Voges-Spanier. And the idea is giving advice is a mandate. So yes, I think there are coaches that would be more on the tough love side of things. Not as much where I lean, but there are questions to ask when I sort of see a situation. If somebody wants to work in a certain industry, in a certain function, have a certain compensation, and in a certain location, let's say the middle of Iowa, I do owe them objectivity. If somebody wants to work in sports, I know the realities of different cultures of different organizations where there may not be a fit out of the compensation generally. So I do offer facts. And so if that's the situation, there may be a need for a timeout. Or what I'll name is switch hats. This is not coming from the coach. This might be something that you need to hear. My objective opinion based on these facts to what you want to do is the probability of that happening is less than maybe something else. That's how I would approach it. I don't know if that's helpful in a specific scenario.
Makes sense. You got outforce.
Right. And that comes with different questions. It's like, okay, if that's not it, what else might be? Everyone asks people what they want to do when they grow up anymore. But the question I really like is, what might you want to try next? And it shifts the paradigm very quickly to one of experimentation, not of certainty.
kind of online question, and she wants to know what was your process for being routine for writing.
My process for the book, there is a LinkedIn post about it that you shared rather transparently. It took about 9 months. I had an idea that I would write a book because of the impact and scale. I really enjoy my one-on-one work, but I wanted, assistance get out there more broadly. Once I had the concept, I quickly had an outline it. And then I had a 14-hour flight to Japan, and I bring about a third of it. I was like, oh.
Wow.
And the time, I told myself it was half done, and I was lying to myself. It was only about a third, as it turns out. So the beginning was a lot of work. The middle was more sort of consistent. I had chapters lined out. I improved the quality, quantity gradually. And then the editing the last couple of months before published was pretty rushed. The one expense I had during the self-publishing was professional editor. And his shoe was tough, and I needed it. And that really elevated to the point where I was kind of out launching.
Hey Scott, my name's Gar. Questions around kind of you spend some time on this topic of resilience, perhaps experience. I've been working in a company for a while, have been able to do a lot of different things. And so I feel like I do have a lot of different skill sets. I have some resilience, but now that I'm looking into a career transition, it seems like for me to make the same level of compensation, I need to have this much level of experience or skill. And I'm trying to figure out like how do I come to terms with doing what I want, also making the same compensation with the skills that I have.
Thanks, brother. I asked you if you could reframe it as about 5-year total compensation. And think about what investment you might make at your skills or marketability that can get you to those numbers over a longer period of time. Because I won't pretend that it's going to be lateral necessarily if you're moving into a new function or a new industry. I think that's a challenge. And, to the earlier point, like, I'm not going to lie to somebody and tell them they can change function, change industry, maintain or grow compensation and title. Like that's more likely of realistic. But if you look at the compensation piece as a longer period of time where you might get to our covert time, we have time. And sometimes it seems like it's sort of breathing out your neck. But if you could think about what you might do over 2 years to invest in your skill set and experience to position yourself to make that change later, what might you do then?
Now we are going to start our wrap-up process but we're going to do the door cards. So we have 2 winners, one in person and one virtual. Both want to well, the both
Thank you. First of all, Carrie, and Bill, of course, for supporting me. Emery Boisweta, not only for the schooling, but he's a bed. Lindsay, Aaron, Nicole, thank you for pulling this off. I'll speak back by that report. And about this to my clients. I'm an entrepreneur. Thank you to my clients for being there. It really meant a lot. Trust me. And I hope I can help you achieve your dreams.